Everybody, welcome back for more live sound tips. I appreciate all of the commentary and encouragement that I've received over the last couple years since I first released the initial batch of videos that I did. I had to put this on hiatus for quite a while, unfortunately, but I'm back now and I'm planning on cranking out a lot more videos, answering a lot more questions, and addressing a lot of the things that folks have been asking me about via Instagram and Facebook and all these other platforms where people have been tracking me down, it's really nice. I appreciate it. So here we go again. The first thing I wanted to do is actually to pick up where we left off, which was in a previous episode, I had talked about how to run a fast and efficient but really amazing sounding sound check, some of the strategies that you want to employ and the various, as I call them, my Jedi mind tricks to make things happen in a easy, quick flowing way, but where everyone's needs are being met. And you're establishing a good connection with the performers right off the bat and building rapport with them, which is super important, because in keeping with the overall theme of the show, the thing about the psychology side of this particular line of work, if you're working in live event production, doing live sound, the psychology part is the thing that a lot of people aren't really talking about. And it's really the place that I've tried to learn the most and educate myself the most about that and experiment with a lot of different ideas and different ways of making things work better for not particularly myself, but actually for the performers on stage. Because when I do that, the natural result is that ultimately it makes my job a lot easier if I'm doing more for others. So with that in mind, I want to pick up at the point of the day in our typical workflow, working again, specifically in small clubs and bars. I'd like to pick up where I left off, having the sound check and all the sort of the difficult, more technical stuff being out of the way now, and moving on to talk about some of the important considerations and things that you want to be doing as soon as the sound check is over, running all the way up through, venue doors opening and the actual first sets and the beginning of the performances, all the way up until the performances are done. Okay, so in keeping with what we've been talking about building rapport and establishing good lines of communication with the performers on the stage so that they're relaxed and that they're comfortable, the first thing I want to say is that as soon as the sound checks are over, do not be that engineer that I've encountered so many times in other venues when I've been a guest engineer who just completely disappears the moment that the sound check is over. Don't think that just because your fingers aren't on the faders, on the controls anymore, that you're free to just leave. That can be really stressful and intimidating for the performers if they suddenly can't find you and there's a narrow window of time before the performance is actually going to happen, and maybe some questions have come up or other concerns, something they just forgot to address or something that they forgot to bring up during the sound check. Oftentimes in our venues, in our small venues, we might be the only person there. Maybe nobody has come in to set up the bar and set up the kitchen, and the door staff isn't there and setting up yet. So you might really be the only interface that they have to get questions answered about their guest list and their drink tickets and just all kinds of miscellaneous stuff that might not even be related to sound, and you may not even have answers for them about those particular things because they're not really within your realm. But you still need to be there to at least then direct them to whatever people they can get to answer those questions. So that's a really important thing. Just don't pull the disappearing act. And look, if you're a sound engineer like me, you have a very narrow window of time to run and grab a bite to eat, run to the restroom, answer some important text messages, make some phone calls that are time sensitive. I get it. Those things happen. It happens to me. We all do it. But if you are going to leave the venue, you need to at least let people know where you're going and let them know that you're going to be back as soon as possible. Because as you've been, if you had watched a previous episode and you had seen the one about running the fast, efficient, great sounding sound check, then you know that all of those little things that you've done, that you've put into place to try and build rapport with the musicians and gain their trust and gain their confidence in you, you just don't want to screw that all up now by suddenly being unavailable. So the bottom line here is that it's important that you just remain as available and as attentive as you can possibly be. All right, now the next thing you want to consider as soon as the sound check is done, when you have a brief window of time, make sure that you go over the production schedule with everybody. It was probably all ironed out and handled ahead of time via email and phone calls that the performers have had with whoever the talent buyer or the booking agent is. But I wouldn't always assume that. And sometimes they don't necessarily know about the production schedule in regards to things like changeover times. So you want to make sure that if you have bands going on at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock, make sure that they understand that they're not playing from 8 till 9. They're playing from 8 to 8:40, and there's a 20-minute changeover to clear their gear out of the way, reset some things on the console, and move some mics around and setting up for the next act. So just make sure that everybody is on the same page with regard to the actual production schedule itself. Then you can, once that's been established of what the norms are and what's actually expected, the next thing you can talk to them about is whether or not there's actually any slack in that schedule. Say you've got bands who are playing on every hour, and the opener has slotted for a 40-minute set with a 20-minute changeover, but they come to you and they say, hey, we actually only have a 30-minute set of material. Can we start 10 minutes later and still end at the same stopping time so that you still have the 20 minutes of the changeover? Sure, that works. Then that gives us 10 more minutes of having doors open to just get some more people, get some more bodies in the room so that they're not playing to an empty room. That's fine, but just make sure that everybody is on board with that sort of thing. Sometimes you might have to say no, and you might have to say, hey, look, it's an all-ages show. We have to stay on a really strict schedule right here because, frankly, I don't care if the show runs late. Like, my job is I'm still here regardless to make you sound great and do what I need to do. It really makes no difference to me. Like, I'm not super invested in what the actual schedule is. But when it's an all-ages show and there's parents outside at 11:30 or whatever and they're waiting to pick up their kids, they start getting pissed off and complaining because the show didn't end when it was supposed to end. So sometimes you have to just say, look, we have a certain hard stop that the headliner's got to be done by a certain amount of time. Another thing is that sometimes you'll have a headliner who they have to be somewhere. Here in San Francisco at the bottom of the hill, a really common thing is that we'll have a headliner who comes through and they have to be somewhere early the next morning, like in Los Angeles, to play like on an early morning radio show or something. So they don't want the show running any later than scheduled because as soon as they're done, they need to pack up and hit the road and get down there as quick as possible because it's a bit of a drive and there's probably not going to be much sleep in between. So just make sure that if there's a venue hard stop time or you've got a tour manager who's sweating you about, hey, make sure these openers go on time because we got to have this thing over at a certain time so that we can get out of here. Just make sure that everybody's on the same page with that because it can be really annoying when an opening band who, you know, not being malicious, but they probably just don't have a lot of experience and they don't know, they think they're supposed to play at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or whatever, and you know, when that time rolls around, they're nowhere to be found. And then at 9:15, they're only just starting to like come back into the venue and set up their gear and you know, tune up their guitars or whatever. And now the show's way behind schedule. So that sort of thing sucks. Make sure that you communicate that stuff to them well in advance. Okay, another thing that's really important, if it wasn't already talked about and discussed during the sound check, is making sure that the performers understand or at least have a good open line of communication with you for whatever needs of whatever things might change once the set has actually begun. And the important part of that is establishing that you're going to have a good sight line with them so that you can actually make eye contact with them and be able to interpret whatever sort of like sign language, kind of, you know, like more vocal here, up a little bit in this monitor, and, you know, this guy needs guitar over in that monitor, up over here, that kind of thing. So sometimes what you have to do is, if your front of house booth isn't in a really great position, you may need to actually establish some sort of a rendezvous point and go and tell them, like, every few songs, I'm going to come over with the iPad that I'm mixing from, and I'm going to stop at the side of the stage, and I'll just kind of like, we'll, make eye contact, and we'll exchange some quick messages about whatever changing monitor needs you have or that sort of thing. Now, if they can see you, if your sound booth does happen to be in a place where they have good line of sight, directly looking straight off the stage, and they can see you, then you want to make sure that you let them know that, hey, and by the way, once the set starts and we get a couple songs in, I may need to go and actually walk the room a little bit just to kind of check the mix in other locations and see how the rest of the audience is hearing it outside of the booth. But make sure that they understand that if they look back at the booth and they don't see you back there, that it's okay, you're going to be back in just a moment, you're just out doing your thing. There are way too many engineers out there at this level of the industry, at the sort of beginner rungs of the ladder in the bars and the small clubs. There's way too many of those engineers who have a set it and forget it approach to how they're doing things. And so what happens is, they just throw the faders up and they dial a couple things in, and after like a song or two, they're over having a drink at the bar, or they're not even inside the venue, they're outside having a smoke break, or they're hanging out like talking on their phone or whatever. So you don't want to be that person. That's definitely something that is really it's gonna mess up their performance if they have critical changes and things that need to happen. So they need to have confidence in you and know that if they look around and they don't see you immediately, that it's okay. You're actually doing something related to being on the job, you're on point, and you're ready to handle things as needed. So one of the reasons that it's important that you establish things like clear sight lines and how we're going to communicate via hand signals usually, and a lot of times, people try to do that as subtly as possible. And it's something that in a separate video I'll address that is going to be specifically for performers as well, so that they understand this sort of thing. One of the reasons that you want to do it as quietly and as subtly as possible is because one thing I've definitely learned over the years of having mixed thousands and thousands of bands at thousands of concerts is that one of the worst vibe killers for the audience in particular is when the band starts calling out monitoring needs over the PA system. They're like, it's PA stands for public address. They're addressing it to the entire public. It's a vibe killer, and it's the sort of thing that, if you're a fan and you're sitting there and you're listening to people banter, back and forth talking about, hey, we need this in the monitors and we need that and whatever. If there isn't an established subtle way of doing that, when you have to resort to that kind of communication, it's a vibe killer because it puts things it takes the audience out of the suspension of disbelief that they're sort of like being transported somewhere else, that they're in this bigger concert experience that they want to have. It snaps them out of it. In the same way that like a bad mix and things like feedback can disturb a performance, which ruins the experience for the fans and the music lovers that are in attendance. So, if they're having to call that stuff out over the PA system in front of everybody, it's like, the first couple thoughts that come to mind is like, well, like, didn't they handle this stuff earlier today at Soundcheck? Like, is the engineer screwing something up? Are they incompetent? Or they're thinking like, is this band just being whiny? Are they being a pain in the ass? Are they being picky? Those are things that the audience doesn't care about that stuff. They don't want to know about that stuff. They don't care who needs more keyboard in what monitor or more acoustic guitar over here, or can you brighten up this or that or whatever. Look, things change once the audience comes in the room. The acoustics of the venue are going to change. Things are going to change, and there's going to be times where people are going to need some sort of adjustments to the monitors and that sort of thing. It's going to happen, but we need to try and do it in a way that is the least obtrusive and the least noticeable to the paying ticket holders. So once the actual performances have started, another reason that it's really important to have good, clear sight lines with the performers is that it's not just about the signal changes and the hand signals and stuff about monitoring needs, but you also want to be able to, you know, if you suddenly, or if you're looking down at the board and you hear like a sudden squeak of feedback and you don't really know what's going on or whatever, you want to be able to look up and actually see everybody on the stage and see what has changed, like what has happened, where did that come from, what person is on mic right now that might be causing that. Probably one of the biggest, most common problems that I've had many times is a band will do the entire sound check with, you know, a vocal microphone, let's say, that's secured on a stand, and then as soon as the actual set time starts, they come out there and they just pop it right off the stand goes off to the side of the stage, and now you've got this person who's cupping the mic, which drives all of us sound engineers crazy, because it changes the EQ of the mic, it changes the polar response pattern, like the pickup pattern of the mic changes, and all of a sudden things go squirrely and go haywire in the monitors. So you want to be able to see that right away, like what's different, like what's going on up there, you know. So that's an important thing, because you may need to be able to hop right onto that channel. Regardless of whether you're analog or digital, you may want to have that lead vocal channel sort of soloed up or visible on the on a touch screen or whatever, you know, as soon as possible, so that you can start changing EQ and doing whatever is necessary to mitigate the problems that are caused by that. Which, by the way, is actually going to be an entire video unto itself. That's a topic that I plan on addressing, specifically aimed towards performers, as to why that is a very undesirable thing that we sound engineers tend to discourage. Now, while the changeover is happening, you may need to end up doing a line check. Sometimes if you're having to repatch channels on the master snake, or you're having to make sure that a scene in a digital console has actually recalled its settings correctly. They are computers, and sometimes really weird things happen and things don't get saved correctly. So sometimes it's a good idea to do a line check. It might even be a tap test where someone just grabs a drumstick and goes around, just taps on all the microphones, that sort of thing. One of the things that you really want to be aware of, and again, this is going in keeping with the psychology of how we need to approach our job, is to understand that you don't want to give the audience a false start. Now, maybe there's performers on stage and they want to do a line check and they want to hear and verify that the monitors are working. Well, that's fine. You can arm the channels and make it so that the monitors are live as you're doing the tap test, or they're checking the vocal mics or whatever, or any instruments that are DI'd only straight into the PA. And that's okay, but just pull the faders down. There'll be a little bit of noise coming off of the stage, but it's going to be sort of like heard as background noise, because it's just, you know, spilling over from the monitors. The other part of that is that you give people a false start, and it's kind of a nuisance, really, because suddenly if they hear at full volume with the faders up, like all this noise coming through the PA, and somebody's like stomping on the kick drum and banging on the snare and the guitar amps and the keyboards and the, you know, all the other stuff and the vocals and whatever, people who are either lined up at the merch table to check out merch from the other bands that have just played, or maybe they're lining up at the bar to get a drink or something, they get that false start, and then they're like, oh, I got to run back out onto the dance floor, or, you know, head back towards the front of the stage and get a good spot or whatever. Then they take off. And so that's just, it's a nuisance. It's a distraction for people. Try to check your lines in headphones whenever possible, and just don't put it actually through the front of house PA if you can avoid it. One other thing that's really important and valuable and a good habit to be in is letting performers know as they're setting up when a changeover happens. Let's say you've got like 5 minutes left to spare and they're already up there and tuning up and they're almost ready to go. Even if you've totally reset your console or recalled your scenes or whatever, even if you're also ready to go, if you can afford that extra few minutes, if you don't need to try and push things ahead of schedule, to try and make up for other things that might have brought things back behind schedule. But assuming that everything's on schedule and you've actually got a little bit of slack and got a little bit of time, tell the performers that they don't need to go on for a few more minutes. It actually can be a big relief for them, and it can be really relaxing just to point at the clock and say, hey, you know, you don't really actually have to go on until 10 o'clock, and we've got like another 5 or 6 minutes. So once you're all tuned up and you're like feeling good and ready to go, you're welcome to step off stage and go grab a drink at the bar, or if you forgot to grab stage towels out of the green room or whatever, they can take off and do that sort of thing. It's kind of relaxing for them. It also lets them know that you're not really stressed out and that you're not pressuring them, and that you're conveying a certain confidence that you're in control of the situation and in control of the flow of the show. And that's important for maintaining that rapport and confidence building in them before their performance. And another thing is that I'm not even a musician and I'm not a performer, but if there's anything I have learned over the years in all the touring I've done with a wide variety of bands and the thousands of bands that have come across the stage at the bottom of the hill and other venues that I've worked in, don't underestimate the importance of pre-show rituals. If a band has a few extra minutes to spare, it's really important, because a lot of bands or performers, not just like bands in the traditional rock band sense, but performers in general, whatever it is that they're doing, they oftentimes might have a pre-show ritual that's really important to them. Sometimes it can be that they just get together like in a group huddle. Maybe everybody does a shot of whiskey together. Sometimes some people will say a prayer with everybody in a circle. There could be an infinite variety of different things that people will want to do, but that stuff's important to them, and it affects their state of mind of how they walk onto the stage and how they get themselves psyched up and ready to really deliver to the audience. So whenever possible, if you've got a little bit of slack and a little bit of extra time in the schedule, make sure that you convey that to them. Make sure that you point at the clock and you tell them that, hey, we're doing good, everything's cool. That's really actually very, very helpful to them, and it's helpful to you. Now, one of the last things that I really want to emphasize here, because I do think it's something that it just doesn't seem like it's a normal topic that would come up, but I think that when it comes to the whole idea of building rapport with people, not only for the purpose of having a great show on that particular day, but also in keeping with the idea that really you're establishing and building relationships with people that you're probably going to be working with again at some point. Hopefully, you're going to be working with them again at some point. And one of the things that really helps that is not only having a good, relaxed, in control, but professional vibe with what you're doing throughout the entire run of the show, but also you just want to be a supporter of what they're doing. You want to be encouraging to what they're doing. I've worked a lot of Monday or Tuesday night shows where it was some local bands playing in the venue, and frankly, 3 or 4, 5 people might have actually paid at the door, and the bands are effectively playing for the other bands that are on the bill because there's almost nobody there. Well, I'm still going to be clapping or cheering in between songs. I don't have to be thinking that they're the greatest band I've ever seen, but I'm still going to encourage them. I'm still going to give them some sort of positive reinforcement that, hey, cool, all right, that was another great song, thank you. And I'm going to clap along with them. I think in a way it's actually even more important the fewer people that are there, because once the venue is all filled up and I've got 300 people here at Bottom of the Hill, then they're not going to hear my applause over all the other people that are screaming and yelling and just all of the noise that's going on in the venue in between songs. But I'm still going to do it, and sometimes I'm still going to do it even though I'm all the way in the back of the room and the band can't hear that I'm a specific person cheering and encouraging them, because by that time some of the other bands that have already played, they might be over here at the bar and they might be looking over at the booth and just kind of watching me work or something. And if they see me standing back here and I'm clapping and yelling and whatever and nodding my head or just, tapping my foot or, whatever it is, just to show that I'm engaged and that I'm enjoying and appreciating what's going on, that sort of thing rubs off on everybody. All right, thanks again for bearing with me and listening to everything that I've had to say about this stuff. I know it's a little bit different because I'm not really covering the technical stuff on the job right now, and I do have plans in future episodes to get to more of that. But, for now, I'm just kind of working the way through the day and the overall workflow of a typical live concert sort of scenario. But yeah, I'll have future topics that are, sometimes I'll get into technical things about, you know, equalization for monitors and coping with feedback problems and all that sort of stuff. Things you want to consider and things that you're going to want to do when you have guest engineers at your venue. There's a lot of stuff that I already have notes on that I've written up that I'll be addressing pretty soon. So thanks again for all of your encouragement. I've been getting so many messages about these videos and just a ton of encouragement and people asking me to cover certain topics and asking me when I'm going to start making more of these. And I really, really do appreciate it. I'm very, very happy to know that so much value is coming from this and that hopefully it's initiating a little bit of a shift in the mentality and the work ethic of a lot of live sound engineers who are just kind of getting started, to help them build their careers so that they can get to, you know, rise to whatever level it is that they want to rise to in this particular industry. So keep sending me your questions, your concerns, your comments, your feedback, whatever, and I'll do my best to get to those topics in future videos. So for the meantime, let's just get back out there and make the next show even better than the last one. All right, thanks again, everybody. Bye.